She leaned across the counter, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been a bad boy returning late." Then she smiled, and I knew this library would never feel the same again. The first thing that always strikes me about the library isn't the books, it's the silence. Not the empty kind, but the kind that holds you gently, as if the world outside has been muted. The air carries a faint mix of polished wood, old pages, and something softer I could never name until tonight, lavender. She was there, as she always was, sitting behind the broad oak desk near the tall windows where the evening light filtered through dust motes. Her posture was unhurried, composed, like she belonged more to this quiet world than to the restless one outside. A pen rested between her fingers, tapping lightly against a leather-bound register. Each subtle movement of hers seemed deliberate, as though she had mastered the art of stillness. I wasn't late, not yet, but I was close enough that she glanced at the clock before lifting her gaze to me. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a flicker of recognition, a silent acknowledgement that she knew me by now. I'd been here often enough. Maybe too often. Her presence had a way of disarming me. She wasn't just beautiful in the conventional sense. She was striking in a quieter, more enduring way, the kind of beauty that deepens the longer you look. The curve of her smile lines, the way her hair fell in graceful waves over her shoulders, the calm confidence in her eyes that hinted at a life lived, lessons learned. As I walked toward the counter, my steps echoed faintly on the polished floor. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she finished whatever note she was writing, capped her pen, and looked up with a small, steady smile. That pause, that measured attention, somehow it made me feel seen in a way I rarely experienced. "Almost closing time," she said, her tone soft yet carrying a warmth that reached further than her words. I nodded, setting the book gently on the counter. The edge of her fingers brushed mine as she slid it toward herself. That fleeting touch sent a quiet spark through me, more noticeable because of how unintentional it was, how natural. The library had always been a place of solitude for me, a refuge from noise. But lately, I realized it wasn't the rows of books or the comfort of silence that kept drawing me back. It was her. The way she seemed to embody everything the library offered, peace, depth, a kind of timelessness. And tonight, as the last slant of golden light fell across her face, I knew something was shifting. What began as routine visits was slowly becoming something else, something I couldn't yet name. When I placed the book on the counter, I already knew what she would notice first, the date stamped on the back page. A week late. My chest tightened with a boyish nervousness I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't fear of a fine, it was the anticipation of how she might respond. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she drew the book toward her, fingers brushing over the worn cover as though she could read its history before even opening it. Then her eyes flicked up to mine, steady, knowing, with the faintest curve tugging at her lips. Her voice lowered just slightly, softer than before, intimate in its quietness. "You've been a bad boy returning late," she whispered. The words sank into me, playful yet edged with something warmer, something that curled beneath my skin. It wasn't scolding, not really. It was teasing, and the way her smile followed a heartbeat later made it impossible to mistake her meaning. I laughed nervously, running a hand over the back of my neck. "I suppose I deserve that." "Suppose?" She tilted her head, one eyebrow arching. "Books are living things, you know. They don't like being neglected." Her tone was light, but the way her gaze held mine felt heavier, rooted. She slid the book further toward her, and in doing so, her fingertips brushed the side of my hand. The contact was so brief, it could have been an accident, but it didn't feel like one. A warmth lingered on my skin, traveling up my arm, an echo that stayed long after her hand had moved away. For a moment, the library didn't feel like a public place at all. It felt like the two of us had stepped into a secret, suspended pocket of time where glances carried more weight than words. "I'll try to be better," I said quietly, almost more to myself than to her. Her smile softened then, losing its teasing edge. "You're already better," she replied, her voice gentle now, as though she hadn't meant for me to hear. I couldn't find an answer to that. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, alive, filled with the rustle of paper, the faint hum of the ceiling lights, and the rhythm of my own heartbeat thudding harder than it should. When she finally looked down again to record the return, I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. I hadn't thought a late book could matter much, but in her hands, even something ordinary carried the weight of something unforgettable. I thought that would be the end of it, her playful warning, my awkward apology, and then silence until the next time I came. But instead of sliding the book onto the return cart, she rested her hand on it, keeping it there between us. "You finished it already?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, as though she was truly curious, not just filling time. "Yes," I said. "Though I can't stop thinking about it." That answer made her eyes brighten. "Which part?" I hesitated, unsure if she really wanted to know. But when her gaze stayed steady, patient, I found myself speaking, about the quiet sadness of the story, the way certain lines seemed to echo long after the page had been turned. I admitted how it had left me unsettled, not because it was dark, but because it felt honest. She listened without interrupting. Her chin rested lightly in her hand, her elbow propped on the counter, and every now and then she nodded, not just politely, but with the kind of recognition that comes from having walked through the same words and felt them in her own heart. "I know exactly what you mean," she said softly. Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper, as though the sentiment wasn't meant for the room at large. "It's a strange comfort when a book tells the truth you've been carrying around quietly." Her words startled me, not their meaning, but their vulnerability. In that moment, she wasn't just the composed librarian who ruled the silence of this place, she was a woman letting me glimpse something more personal. I didn't know what to say, so I let the silence stretch. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, alive, like the pause between notes in a song. When she finally spoke again, her tone was lighter, but her eyes still carried that softness. "You read quickly. Most people take twice as long." I shrugged. "Maybe I just wanted to bring it back here sooner." Her lips curved, not into a smile exactly, but into something warmer, something that felt like it belonged only to me. The lamplight above her desk caught a strand of silver in her dark hair, a detail that made her beauty sharper, more real. She leaned a little closer, her voice dropping again. "Then perhaps I should be careful what I recommend next." And there it was, that sense that our conversations were becoming something more than casual. Each word seemed to linger in the air between us, delicate and unspoken, as though the library itself was holding its breath for what might come next. When she finally rose from her chair, I expected her to hand me another title the way she usually did. Instead, she motioned for me to follow. "There's something I think you'll like," she said, her voice calm but tinged with quiet certainty, as if she already knew how the book would sit with me. We walked together into the deeper aisles of the library, where the shelves grew taller and the lights dimmer, casting long shadows that seemed to close around us. Our footsteps echoed softly, muffled by the carpet, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the old air vents. She stopped in front of one of the tallest shelves and glanced upward. "It should be here," she murmured, her eyes scanning the spines. She reached for the top, rising onto her toes, her fingers just brushing the edge of the book she wanted. Without thinking, I stepped closer, my hand instinctively brushing against her waist to steady her. The moment stretched. The warmth of her body pressed lightly against my arm, and the faint fragrance of her perfume, something floral, subtle, rose in the narrow space between us. She froze for the briefest instant, her breath catching almost imperceptibly. Then, slowly, she let herself lean just enough to balance against the touch, as if she trusted it, trusted me. My pulse quickened, though I tried to keep my hand gentle, respectful, not lingering longer than it should. When she finally drew the book free, she stepped back, her movement smooth, deliberate, but her eyes lingered on mine. "Thank you," she said softly, as though the word carried a weight far greater than the gesture itself. I managed a small smile, though my voice came out lower than I intended. Anytime. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, filled with an unspoken awareness that neither of us wanted to break too quickly. The narrow aisle felt like its own world, a hidden corner where time slowed, where even the smallest movement seemed amplified, the brush of her sleeve against my arm, the way her fingers adjusted the book she now held. As we walked back toward the counter, I realized I hadn't thought once about the story inside the book. All I could think about was the fleeting warmth of her against me, the quiet trust she had shown by not pulling away. And as she set the book gently on the desk, her hand lingering on its cover, I wondered if she felt the same electric pause that still pulsed through me. I thought she would simply slide the book across the counter and send me on my way, the way she usually did. But instead, she hesitated. Her hand lingered on the cover, her eyes dropping to the desk for a moment before lifting to meet mine again. "Do you want to see something?" she asked quietly, almost as if the question wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. I nodded, and once again she led me into the maze of shelves, though this time we stopped midway, in a corner where the light seemed softer and the air carried the faint, comforting scent of paper that had aged with dignity. It felt hidden, as though it had been waiting for us all along. She rested her hand lightly on a row of books, fingers tracing the spines with a kind of reverence. "This is where I come when the world feels too much," she said softly. "It's silly, I know. But these stories, they've always been safer than people." Her honesty startled me. Not because it was strange, but because it was real, unexpected from someone who always carried herself with such calm control. I searched her face and found a flicker of vulnerability there, a quiet openness she rarely allowed to show. "It's not silly," I said. My voice was low, steady, even though my chest felt tight. "Sometimes I think I come here for the same reason. Not just for the books, but for the quiet. For the way it feels to not have to pretend." Her lips parted, a soft exhale leaving her, as though my words touched something unspoken within her. She turned slightly, her shoulder brushing mine in the narrow space. The contact was small, but it felt deliberate, grounding. "You surprise me," she whispered, almost to herself. Then, more directly, "I thought you only came here for the books." I swallowed hard before answering. "Not just the books." For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence was thick, alive with all the things I wanted to say but couldn't, all the things she might already know. Her hand slid gently from the spines and came to rest on my forearm, light as a feather. The warmth of her touch spread quickly, and I had to fight the urge to close the distance entirely. She looked up at me then, her eyes soft, searching, as though weighing something within herself. But instead of speaking, she left the silence to carry what words could not. And in that hidden corner, it felt as though both of us had finally admitted something we hadn't dared put into words. Closing time was creeping closer, the soft hum of the overhead lights mingling with the quiet rustle of pages. The library, once bustling with whispered footsteps and turning pages, now felt like a world suspended just for us. I could hear my own heartbeat in the near silence, a steady drum that seemed impossibly loud. We walked together toward the front desk, each step careful, deliberate. She didn't break our shared space, her presence brushing against me more than once, subtle but electrifying. When she paused near the door, I noticed the faint tension in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible hesitation in the tilt of her head. She looked up at me, her eyes softer now, more intimate, as if she were weighing some invisible question only I could answer. For a moment, the room fell away. The shelves, the lamps, the scattered books, all of it faded into the background. All that existed was the space between us, the almost imperceptible pull drawing us closer. I leaned slightly, almost unconsciously, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. She didn't step back. The small gap between us was electric, a charged silence thick enough to taste. My breath mingled with hers, just for a second, and the faint scent of her perfume, soft, floral, almost like the pages of a book warmed by sunlight, enveloped me. Her fingers moved lightly to adjust the collar of my shirt, a gesture so intimate it sent a shiver down my spine. The touch lingered longer than necessary, deliberate but unspoken, a language of closeness and trust that needed no words. My hands hovered at my sides, unsure whether to stay still or close the distance completely. I could feel the subtle quiver in her hand, the warmth radiating from her palm, and I realized neither of us wanted to move away. The unspoken tension hung heavy, deliciously unbearable, as if the entire library were holding its breath for what might come next. "Tomorrow," she murmured softly, almost to herself, a gentle admonition that could have meant anything. My chest tightened, and I understood that neither of us wanted to rush this, not yet. Not until the moment was fully ours. And then the doorbell rang, startlingly bright in the hush. Reality crept back in, the library, the world outside, the clock reminding us that time would always move forward. We stepped apart slowly, almost reluctantly, the electricity between us lingering like a ghost. She returned my gaze with a small, knowing smile, one that promised more without saying a word. My hands itched to bridge the gap again, but I knew some things were better savored, waiting for their proper moment. As she closed the front desk drawer, I took a deep breath, aware that the almost touch, the almost kiss, had changed everything between us. And yet, somehow, it made me want to come back, to linger in that charged silence once more. The evening had grown quiet. The overhead lights cast long shadows across the polished floors, and the last echoes of other visitors had faded into memory. She moved with her usual grace behind the counter, but there was a softness in her movements tonight, a gentle ease that hadn't been there earlier. She reached for a book on the counter, sliding it toward me with a delicate, deliberate motion. Her fingers brushed mine for a brief instant as she passed it over. The contact was light, almost accidental, yet it carried all the warmth and intention of a touch meant to linger. I felt it travel up my arm, settling somewhere deep in my chest. "Return this on time, or maybe late," she whispered, her voice carrying a teasing lilt that made my heart tighten. Her eyes glimmered with that same warmth and mischief that had haunted me throughout the evening, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. I held the book, fingers brushing against hers again as she withdrew. The weight of it seemed heavier than the pages warranted, filled instead with the unspoken promise of moments yet to come. I wanted to say something, anything, that might capture what I felt, but the right word seemed impossible. She glanced toward the door, and I realized it was time to leave. The air outside felt colder, sharper, a stark contrast to the lingering warmth she had left behind. I hesitated, hand on the door handle, and found her gaze following mine. That look, it was quiet, patient, full of meaning, as if she had placed a piece of herself into that moment just for me. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said softly, though there was no need to, her eyes said the same thing. As I stepped out, the door closing behind me with a gentle click, the memory of her smile, the brush of her hand, the quiet intimacy of the library wrapped itself around me. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a declaration. But it was enough to make me crave the next moment we would share, the next lingering conversation, the next subtle brush of warmth between us. And in that lingering echo, I understood something I hadn't fully realized before. It wasn't just the books or the quiet that had drawn me here. It was her. Every glance, every touch, every carefully measured word had built a world I wanted to inhabit, a world where closeness was measured not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, deliberate attention of someone who truly saw you. As I walked away, the streetlights casting long pools of light across the pavement, I held on to that feeling, the promise of tomorrow, of moments just like this, waiting in the quiet corners of the library. And for the first time, I felt certain that some connections were meant to be savored slowly, letting their warmth grow until it could no longer be contained. And if you want to see how our story unfolds beyond this evening, and experience every quiet glance, lingering touch, and secret smile, the full story is waiting for you. Check the link in the description and step back into the library where everything began.